so many days to cool it, and if they don't take that. The letter. But we just sent one.
Did you see the,
I had to.
council on recommendation plans due?
It's the same thing.
That same verbiage, so like, we track the
Like,
vacancies.
we're not, it's CR stuff. So we're gonna take
And
some.
then we'll have so many days to fill the vacancy.
We're good.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we would first, you know, if it goes as planned, right, and they pass the budget weeks,
Yeah.
then it'll be just fine. If we run into May, they'll issue another one. If it goes later than that.
Okay, that was my understanding.
Yeah, so this is a different thing that's on budget.
Okay.
But, and they reissue them if it goes longer, which I don't think has happened really badly since 2013.
You ready? Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the 2024 Action Plan Public Hearing related to the federal formula grants, CDBG, Home, HAWA, ESG, and Housing Trust Fund. Members of KHC and the Department of Local Government will talk about this year's plans and highlights around the annual action plan. They will also provide any specific answers to questions around those funding sources. So with that, I'll open the meeting and turn it over to Kendrick Vonderschmidt.
Good afternoon. My name is Kendrick Vonderschmidt. I'm the Managing Director of Corporate Planning and Accountability here at Kentucky Housing Corporation. The upcoming action plan will cover the time period from July 1st, 2024 to June 30th, 2025. It is the fifth in our series of action plans for this cycle of planning. It is the Commonwealth's application and distribution plan that we submit to Housing and Urban Development's Office of Community Planning and Development each year. The block grant programs included in this action plan are the Home Investment Partnership Fund, the Emergency Solution Grant, the Community Development Block Grant, and the Housing Trust Fund, and the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS grant. In conjunction with the Department of Local Government, KHC is responsible for preparing and submitting this plan to HUD. We will have a draft of the plan posted and available for public comment from April 1st, 2024 to May 3rd, 2024. We will be sending out an e-gram to remind everyone of this public comment period when it arrives and to provide a link where they can access the plan. The plan will be posted on our website under the Consolidated Planning page. We will accept comments via email. The email for this is corpplanreport@kyhousing.org, and that email will be available in the e-gram as well. Now I'll turn it over to Mark Williams from the Department of Local Government.
My name is Mark Williams with the Department of Local Government. Thanks, Kendrick. This is Cole Sutton, my partner over there. I'm the compliance branch manager for our CDBG program. We anticipate, this is a draft action plan, of course. We anticipate getting something close to the amount we received last year, which was $26,492,151. And we have the guidelines. I think there's 80 pages, so I'd like to go over just some of our proposed changes. That the split of funds, we base our split of funds on the amount of applications we've received in the past few years. Unfortunately, the Economic Development Department getting cut a little bit, and the program manager's not really very happy. But we are going to allocate for public facilities, basically water and sewer, $9,100,000. Economic development, $3,500,000. Housing, $4,500,000. That's up from last year. Community projects, senior centers, or senior centers, fire stations, that type of thing, 5,897,386. And the public services, the Recovery Kentucky program will stay the same with 13 centers at receiving $200,000 each. So that would be $2,600,000 total. Something that we have added on page 11 of our guidelines, and this, we're still talking CDBG, but applicants from a HUD most impacted and distressed area or state, MID county, applying for a housing project to assist those households affected by either disasters 4595, 4630, and 4663 may apply for up to $2 million per application. All applications must receive prior approval from GLG to proceed, and all threshold requirements for CDBG are still applicable. We no longer have a SERV Community Emergency Relief Fund. They moved to a standalone document. It's not in the guidelines, and this is typically up to the commissioner or the governor to determine if a community is an emergency, a water tank failing or something like that. Other than that, the submission dates are pretty much the same. Submission dates for community projects and public facilities applications are due September 1, 2024. Public services, housing, and economic development are good through, we can accept applications through 1/31/2025. And if there are any more questions, I've got the guidelines here we can answer, but that's about all I have. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Curtis Stauffer with Kentucky Housing Corporation's Housing Contract Administration Division. To discuss our allocations of emergency solutions grants funding, housing opportunities for persons with AIDS funding, and a portion of our home investment partnerships funding. But before I begin, I do want to reiterate the very important point that Congress has not yet passed the fiscal year 2024 budget. Therefore, we are only making guesses as to the anticipated funding that will be allocated to the Commonwealth. As Mark mentioned, it's expected that we'll see hopefully level funding this year, but these awards will likely not be determined any earlier than March 1st when the current continuing resolution expires. So now to discuss emergency solutions grants. The Emergency Solutions Grants Program was created when the Homeless Emergency Assistance and Rapid Transition to Housing Act of 2009 amended the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act, thereby revising the Emergency Shelter Grants Program in significant ways and renaming it the Emergency Solutions Grant, or ESG program. The ESG interim rule took effect on January 4th, 2012. The ESG program provides funding to 1, engage homeless individuals and families living on the street; 2, improve the number and quality of emergency shelters for homeless individuals and families; 3, help operate these shelters; 4, provide essential services to shelter residents; 5, rapidly rehouse homeless individuals and families; and 6, prevent families and individuals from becoming homeless. ESG funds may be used for 5 program components: street outreach, emergency shelter, homelessness prevention, rapid rehousing assistance, and homeless management information system costs, as well as administrative activities up to 7.5% of recipients' allocation for such administrative costs. For federal fiscal year 2023, KHC was awarded $2,656,768 in ESG dollars, which we allocated to 35 programs from 33 subrecipient agencies throughout the 118 county balance of state. These funds were awarded by a competitive application. ESG funds also support KHC's administrative costs of the program. KHC will hold another competitive application to allocate federal fiscal year 2024 funds in spring 2024 after the allocation is announced by HUD. Please note that HUD awarded CARES Act ESG funding, known as ESGCV, totaling $23,404,450 to KHC in federal fiscal year 2019. Activities supported by those funds were included in the 2015 to 2019 consolidated plan and the action plan governing federal fiscal year 2019. KHC awarded ESG funding to subrecipients to support rapid rehousing, emergency shelter, homelessness prevention, street outreach, and HMIS costs, as well as administrative expenses. ESG-CV funds also support KHC's administrative costs. These ESG-CV funded subrecipient programs have already used all their funding or will use all their funding by the conclusion of federal fiscal year 2024. Now moving on to the Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS, or HOPA program. For federal fiscal year 2023, KHC was awarded $1,392,747 in HOPA funding via formula allocation. KHC will award these federal fiscal year 2023 HOPA formula dollars in spring 2024 via a competitive application process. HOPA funding cycles are delayed to reduce the administrative burden on KHC and our subrecipients because they used HOPA CARES Act funding and also submitted applications for a new national HOPA competitive funding round in fall of 2022. KHC will award federal fiscal year 2024 HOPA funding in spring 2025 after the allocation is announced by HUD. Federal fiscal year 2022 HOPA funding totaling $1,224,026 was competitively awarded to AWOL Kentucky, Live Well Community Health Services, and Matthew 25 AIDS Services in spring 2023. HOPA can provide households with case management and supportive services, tenant-based rental assistance, and short-term mortgage, rent, and utility payments, also called STRMU. Funds also support KHC's administrative costs for this program. Please note that HUD also awards HOPA funds outside the formula allocation process that is governed by this annual allocation plan on a 3-year renewal cycle in a separate national competitive process. In December 2022, HUD renewed these HOPA competitive grants for an additional 3 years for Kentucky's grantees who are AWOL Kentucky, Live Well Community Health Services, and Volunteers of America Mid-States. These competitive grant awards total $455,870. And now we'll turn to the Home Investment Partnerships Program. Created by Congress in 1990, the Home Investment Partnerships Program provides funding to subrecipients for several types of affordable housing production and rehabilitation activities. KHC administers and monitors the program for U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, awarding funding to eligible subrecipients, including local governments, housing authorities, private developers, and nonprofit housing providers. The purpose of the HOME program is to expand the supply of quality, affordable housing for low-income individuals at or below 88% of area median income, and very low-income individuals at or below 50% of area median income. The HOME program can be utilized to expand the supply of decent, safe, and sanitary housing through either new construction or rehabilitation of existing structures with forgivable deferred grants. And the HOME program's flexibility also empowers local communities to design and implement strategies tailored to meet their own housing needs and priorities. KHC awards HOME funds to developers and subrecipient agencies to support the construction or rehabilitation of rental units, the construction or rehabilitation of homeownership units, as well as tenant-based rental assistance, which helps income-eligible households with rental subsidies for up to 24 months. Please note that KHC does not fund owner-occupied home repair with HOME funds, instead uses Kentucky Affordable Housing Trust Fund dollars for that purpose. For federal fiscal year 2023, KHC was awarded $15,095,567 HOME dollars. In the current fiscal year, using HUD federal fiscal year 2023 funds, program income, and prior years available funds, $3 million is allocated to tenant-based rental assistance, $8.2 million to rental production, $4 million to single-family homeownership production, and $1.3 million to disaster recovery housing development. HOME funds also support Community Housing Development Organization operating grants totaling $150,000 and KHC and subrecipient administrative costs. KHC is currently scoring competitive applications for single-family development funded through federal fiscal year 2023 funds and in conjunction with our Kentucky Affordable Housing Trust Fund dollars. We anticipate announcing awards for these home ownership development funds in March 2024. Another competitive application for single-family homebuyer development will be released in November 2024 and will award federal fiscal year 2024 dollars in March 2025. Using a 2-year grant cycle, KHC will competitively allocate federal fiscal year 2023 home tenant-based rental assistance funds in spring 2024 and will proportionally allocate federal fiscal year 2024 home tenant-based rental assistance funds on a renewal basis to spring 2024 awardees in spring 2025. Please note that the American Rescue Plan Act passed on March 11th, 2021, allocated $5 billion in home funds nationwide to provide rental assistance and supportive services, develop affordable rental housing, help acquire non-concrete shelter to be converted into permanent affordable housing or be used as emergency shelter. These funds must primarily benefit individuals or households who are or at risk of homelessness, people who are fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, sexual assault, or human trafficking, or populations for whom supportive services will prevent the family's homelessness or having a high risk of housing instability. And veterans in any of those categories are also eligible for assistance. Kentucky Balance Estate was allocated $52,512,704 in home ARP funds. These funds are not part of the federal fiscal year 2024 action plan discussed today. Rather, they are governed by an allocation plan submitted as an amendment to the 2021 action plan. HUD approved KHC's home ARP allocation plan in January 2022. The vast majority of these home ARP funds, $38.5 million, will be used to support the development of supportive housing units. $7.5 million has been allocated to fund supportive services in those units to be developed, as well as a continuation of street outreach programs funded by the Emergency Solutions Grants CARES Act program. $500,000 will be available for nonprofit developer capacity building, and 10% of home ARP funding will also support KHC and subrecipient administrative costs. We initially allocated $2 million for the development of non-concrete shelter. However, a December 2022 competition for those funds received no viable applications. Therefore, that funding was reallocated to rental production. In KHC fiscal year 2024, our homeless programs team awarded home ARP funds just in totaling $1.6 million in services dollars and $160,000 in administrative funds to 7 subrecipient agencies to support 8 street outreach projects in the Kentucky Balance Estate. Now I'll turn it over to Terry Helton to discuss home-funded multifamily activities.
Thank you, Kurt. The home funds are also used for the creation and preservation of affordable rental housing units. Unlike home, in which we utilize those funds in various ways, I'll also speak to the National Housing Trust Fund, or NHTF dollars. KHC anticipates using all of its NHTF allocation toward the preservation and or creation of rental units. That source of funding will be directed to rental units. Both the home funds and the NHTF will be awarded, excuse me, competitively to multifamily projects that have a need for gap financing that have met the regulatory programmatic requirements of these respective programs. KHC's policies related to our home and NHTF multifamily programs are available in the multifamily guidelines, which are located on KHC's website. An updated version of these guidelines will be published in the near future for fiscal year 2025 and will be posted in the coming weeks. KHC expects to make home and NHTF funds available for the 2025 9% competitive funding round, for which applications will open up tentatively in May of 2024 and be due tentatively August of 2024. Those are our expected timelines with respect to the 2025 9% competitive funding round. As we have in the past, we will also expect to make home and NHTF funds available as gap financing for tax-exempt bond transactions, and we expect to have those notices of funding availability posted with respect to these timelines here May of 2024. And that is my brief discussion on the NHTF and home funds with respect to the rental housing.
I think at this time, we'll open it up for questions. If anyone has questions, if you're on Zoom and you have questions, feel free to put a question in the chat or come off mute and ask a question.
Hi, this is Kathy Hinko. I would, take myself a video, but I'm still recovering from surgery, so I'm lying like a potentate. And so I'm just going to ask, what in terms of, first of all, I'm thrilled that so much of our resources, this is with KHC, don't worry, Department of Local Government, I've got a question for you.
Relax now.
Thrilled that we're going to create units. What I never saw in the strategies or of the consolidated plan is a focus on not segregating. Is there any portion that goes towards helping create affordable housing in areas where there isn't affordable housing and might be a little more costly. Because I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I think we can do two things. And frankly, I have never been supportive of using home funds, the regular ones, for tenant-based rental assistance, which is evanescent when over all those years, we could have been creating more affordable housing that's still in play when our great need is that. So those are the two things that I have just in general for all the programs with KHC. And I could get out my question to the Department of Local Government, and then you could take turns asking, or I could let somebody else ask a question.
To you,
Oh, you want me to ask the Department of Local Government as well? So this is one you can cogitate on while KHC either responds or simply notes my comment, which is, how are you ensuring that your CDBG funds are really serving low to moderate income people, and you aren't just replacing the fact that municipalities don't want to raise taxes? And for instance, the sewage that you're going to do, or the firehouses that you're going to. I just want to know that you are really not just replacing what should be done for middle and upper income people with CDBG money, but that is really being used to help low to moderate income people. So those are my questions for KHC and Department of Local Government.
Thanks, Kathy. Can we start with question one?
My understanding is that question pertains to creating new rental units in communities, higher income communities.
I mean, yeah, that creating in areas where there isn't affordable housing, because it might be a little more expensive, but you can use it to help desegregate affordable housing into, which in fact, Department of Local Government, you should be concerned about this, only helps create slums where that are entirely low income and subsidized. So do we have any thoughts on that? Because I don't see it in the strategies or the commitments of the consolidated plan that is something that you want to do. And I'm just asking, but maybe it is something that you're doing. And then, of course, the tenant-based rental assistance is just a comment by me.
So I cannot speak from memory as to our strategies for that in the con plan. Terry, would you like to speak anything about the QAP and how?
So currently right now, multifamily programs, we are working on our next 2-year cycle qualified allocation plan. I think we have some scoring criteria, some policies in there that will address those, Kathy, to your comments about getting the new units in different areas. So that is in a draft format currently, which will be presented to the Programs and Policy Committee meeting next week. And then I think some of those, your concerns will be addressed at that time.
Okay, then what you're anticipating is that, like the National Housing Trust Fund, your house, I'm in Kentucky, our Housing Trust Fund, that really is mostly used to couple with low-income housing tax credits and not other ways of producing affordable housing.
Yes, the National Housing Trust Fund is used for gap financing for our competitive program as well as for our tax exempt bond programs.
Okay.
I will respond generally speaking for CDBG. Of course, we can only fund cities or counties, so we accept applications from cities or counties. But part of our application is a survey. At least 51% of anyone in a area where water systems are going. Housing, it has to be 100% low moderate income. HUD sets the income limits each year for every city and county in Kentucky. And we monitor, review the surveys and do our best to make sure that the people who are supposed to be receiving these funds do so. And I can take this back to our specific housing or public facilities if you'd like some further confirmation.
Oh, I always love more information.
Okay.
And that, they'll tell you.
Okay.
And Kathy, in addition to further information, I'm gonna ask, Curtis, if any of the other ESG or HOPWA, or you mentioned specifically, Kathy, home, in relation to, the regular home dollar, if there's anything that you have to add to Kathy's comment to further.
No, our division awards funds via competitive applications to community-based nonprofit organizations providing services to persons at risk of or experiencing homelessness, households where a family member has HIV or AIDS, as well as developers providing repair and homeownership development services. So the location of the houses are really driven by where the developers can acquire land to build new homes and or existing properties for rehabilitation and resale. We don't have a policy perspective per se that forces them into particular neighborhoods or locations. It's all based on their assessment of their communities, their development capacity, and the availability of lots and land throughout the regions. We do prioritize geographic diversity across the balance of states. So in some cases, if we lack the most competitive applications, but they're serving an underserved region, we will tend to prioritize those applications over others that might score better in the application review process. But generally speaking, we're largely driven by the plans implemented by our subrecipient partners.
But we don't also either offer incentives, financial incentives that would enable some developer to buy in a more expensive area. There's no program that does.
Developers are free to propose the budgets that they wish for those projects. We've not put limitations on acquisition or development costs. So if they propose utilizing their funds to acquire those lots in a higher area, that's fine. We have no additional subsidy options we can provide to those partners.
That's what I was talking about, additional subsidy to say,
We don't
I
have that flexibility.
recognize this is a more expensive part of town, so you get more money for acquisition.
We don't place limits on those costs. So the developers submit individual units as proposed for development that can include as eligible expenses, acquisition costs for lots or units for rehabilitation resale, total development costs, and other expenses related to development of both hard and soft costs. So really it's driven by the developer's choice of how they choose to utilize their awarded funds.
But that's exactly what I'm saying. If you have $10 and you use $7 for land acquisition instead of $5, I mean, it's right. I mean, then you only have $5. You only have $3 left for building.
Business practices, Kathy, as long as they're complying with the regulations governing the program. They submit competitive applications and demonstrate a need to serve low-income persons in their communities. And they develop where they have availability of land and resources. And they can choose to allocate their funding across their units as they choose within the various eligible costs.
And you realize I'm starting to talk about when you develop our next consolidated plan, which will be next year, I guess. Just letting people think about issues that we might address.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Yeah, I've got a question. Matthew Harrell, APK Development and Construction in Louisville, Kentucky. And I was fortunate enough to be a part of an application that was awarded a 9% tax credit in the last round. And one, I wanted to thank KHC for the foresight of including MBE participation as a bonus to developers. I think we got quite a few MBEs and diverse developers that are now on the track to hopefully become a resource for KHC and their local economies for addressing affordable housing needs. One of the things that I would ask KHC to consider is, as a part of that, one of the things when you are approved is that you are restricted from receiving any other KHC forms of funding for 3 years, right? Essentially till you get the 8609. And so I understand from maybe a tax credit perspective, because those dollars are involved in a tax credit multifamily development. But I do think it handicaps the MBE that is a budding, if you will, developer or a growing developer to be ostracized from any other additional funding. For instance, if they wanted to do small tract, single family housing, if they wanted to do, duplex housing, KHC would still play an integral part in that funding capital stack. So I do think that bears a reconsideration, particularly if that MBE is partnered with a team that has had great experience with KHC and has done projects in the past that have been extremely successful. So I think that bears some thought process, particularly if that's something, and I hope you are going to continue to include in the QAP.
Thank you for your comments. You said you were awarded a 9% project. Which project was that?
So I am partnered with Walbuck
Walbuck?
in Hopkinsville.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
For, the Good Acre project.
All right.
Just will that comment be written up? Because in another world, I'm on the board of KHC representing nonprofit developers, but any developers, and I'm very interested in what that developer just said as we look at the next QAP. So will that comment be written up so that I can look at it and think about it?
Yes, we'll make that available for you, Kathy.
Do we have further questions or comments?
Barring further questions or comments, that concludes our hearing. Again, we will send out an eGram when the public comment period opens for the 2024 annual action plan. Thank you for attending.